It takes humility to admit that we have needs. And in order to do that, we need to humble our heart before God. We know that in 1 John 2:16, the pride of life is one of the evils of this world. John said there's the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And so there are people who will not admit they've got a need. The reason I put this up here as the first step is I have people come to me and say, oh, my Uncle John, he needs to hear this stuff. Oh, Uncle John, he needs this stuff. I say, oh yeah, good. Is he a Christian? Oh, no. Would he listen to me and respect what I had to say out of the Bible? Oh, no. I said, well, I can't help Uncle John, right? Because he's not even ready to admit he's got a need and humble himself before God. If a person comes along arrogant and proud and resistant to God, there's not much help I can give them because it's God that actually brings the power into their life. So admitting you've got a need is the first thing. I tell the story, and I may as well share it with you here. I went in New Zealand on an outstation when I was at Bible college. Went down to the bottom end of New Zealand, and I stayed with an old lady in her home. She was putting up our team, but different people were in different houses. I went into the home of a lovely little old lady. I can't remember her name, but I remember going into the place, and the house was not really very well kept, and it was a bit awkward. But anyway, she was lovely, and I stayed. And as over dinner, I said to her, you know, how long you been a widower? And she told me, and I said, what happened to your husband? And she said, oh, well, all the ladies of the church went on an outing. We went all the way down to Stewart Island, which is off the bottom end of Invercargill on the bottom of the South Island. This place was an hour and a half, 2 hours up from Invercargill. And she said, we went down there for a lovely time at Stewart Island, and we came back to stay in a hotel in Invercargill that night. And over dinner, I got this strong impression I should ring my husband, Harold, and say, to let him know that I was safe and I was back on the island. And the other lady said, oh, no, we're husband-free at the moment. You know, you don't want to talk to your husband, you know, give him the flick. No, just stay and have dinner. She felt really she should ring her husband. And the other ladies kind of cajoled her into not doing it, and so she didn't make the phone call. And when she got back there to Invercargill sort of early the next afternoon, they found him dead inside the house. When the doctors came and checked him out, they said he probably died about 10 p.m. the previous night. And she thought if I'd phoned him, he might have said, I'm feeling pretty lousy. And she could have called a friend who might have called in, and she could have done anything. And maybe that was why she was being prompted to phone him. She didn't ring, and he died, and her phone call probably would have made all the difference. Now you can imagine what she's feeling on the inside in terms of guilt and stuff. And I could see her, you know, teary and really carrying a whole lot of stuff. And I'm thinking about the steps to release. I'm thinking, I could help this lady. I can work her through some of this stuff. And I said, would you maybe think about getting some prayer for this? She went, no, I'm fine, thanks. Time heals, she says. And I thought, time hasn't healed you, darling. You're not healed. You're still in all that pain. And whatever time does, it might just let moss grow over the thing, but the problem is still there. Now, I was there as a guest in her home. It wasn't my place to insult her or say to her, you stupid woman, or anything like that at all, right? I just had to let her make the choice. She made the choice that she was not going to admit her need. And so we just finished up with a cup of coffee, and then I went to have a bath and discovered that I had to scrub the bath for 20 minutes before I had to get into it. You know, anyway, so that was another part of the story. But if a person won't admit their need, that's got to be the beginning for us. So I need you to be prepared to say that the issue that you've got to deal with is one that you're prepared to admit. You've got a need for that. Remember, God resists the proud, but he gives grace to who? The humble, the people that will humble us. God, I've got a problem. God was speaking into my life in a number of different ways. When I was in primary school, I discovered that I had a very deep shame. And I discovered it by being up in front of all of the kids at the assembly and realizing that as soon as I saw them, my face went red like a beetroot. My eyes began to burn, and I blinked at 90 miles per hour, and tears streamed down my face, and I couldn't see a thing. I was having a kind of a stage fright thing, whatever it was. I felt desperately shocked. I'd never had this experience before. And I managed to get off the stage when I was finished. And I thought, I've got this real problem with shame of some sort. I don't know what it is. I had no idea no language for it or anything at all. I just knew I had this problem. And for the rest of that year at school, my last year at primary school, I struggled with this realization that I could not look people in the eye. I was afraid that if I looked down and saw them looking at me, that was embarrassing. So I'd look at the floor or the ceiling all the time. I would never look at people in the eye. And I thought, I don't know what I can do about this problem, and all my friends kind of have seen me get embarrassed and everything else. When I go to high school, the 6 different schools feed into the same high school, so 5 out of every 6 kids had never seen me before, so I can bluff them. And that's when I started the bluff game of coming out and looking confident and pretending that I had no problems on the inside, when I knew there was something unfixed up on the inside of me, right? And so I went on then to win speaking competitions and to be the school's top debater and to be in a competition that took me to the state finals and stuff. I acted in the school musicals. I was a hero because it was all one big fat facade, big front, hiding what I was trying to hide deep on the inside of me. And God kept saying to me, Chris, I want to deal with that. I was saying, pick on someone else. Chris, I want to set you free. I feel fine, leave me alone, right? And so it was when I was in my later years, late teenage years, I was invited in a small hired hall to get up and song lead in front of the church. And the song lead went along nicely. It was one of those things where you start with a fast song, then go to a more mellow song, and then go to a lovely, sweet prayer song when most people close their eyes. When we got to that part where most people had their eyes closed singing, I suddenly found my face start to burn and go red like a beetroot. I began to blink at 90 miles per hour and tears streamed down my face. And I got off the platform as quickly as I could and sat on the front row. And I said, God, I think I've got a problem. He says, finally you'll admit you've got a need? See, I say it took a long time for God to get through to me because I was too proud and afraid of God to actually let him get in and deal with me. Interestingly, and this will help you, God spoke to me and said, Chris, I only deal with real people. If you want to be plastic and false, then I can't help you. And you're going to stay plastic and false for the rest of your life. But if you'll be honest and real, just be who you really are, especially with me and with other people, just be real, I will take the real shriveled up you and make the shriveled up you better than your false front could ever appear to be. I said, okay, you've got a deal. And that meant I had to stop lying about who I was, stop pretending to be older or wiser or more talented, and actually start just being me. And that was a difficult journey, but God was good. Praise God. God was gracious. So the first step that I always put in my thing is you've got to admit you've got a need. If you won't admit you've got a need, you've got a problem. God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. But look at what King David said in Psalm 32. When we hide our problems and sin gets worse, he was in a situation where he wouldn't admit his sin, and he found himself, he couldn't sleep. There were all kinds of other problems happening in his life because he wouldn't admit his need. You've got to be prepared to do that. We can resist God, fearing that he will hurt us or not show mercy to us. But look at this beautiful verse out of Jeremiah 29. I know my thoughts toward you for peace and not evil, to give you a good outcome. God is going to do beautiful things, and even a bruised reed he will not break. A smouldering flax he will not quench. I felt like on the inside of me there wasn't much real me left, and I was just desperately afraid that if God got in there and messed with me, I didn't know what would happen. And I saw this scripture. God is not going to damage me even when I'm already damaged on the inside and when I'm running out of puff. Hallelujah. So, are you ready to admit your need? This is a workshop. There's the prayer. We'll just read it out together. Lord, I admit that I cannot solve this issue. I humble myself and accept I do have a problem and I can't keep hiding it or running away from it. I'm not as good or capable as I want to be. I'm hurting and broken and I need your love and grace in my life. I'm going to give you just a moment to actually make that your personal prayer as you do step number 1. Think of the issue that you've chosen and say, God, here's my issue. It's still an issue because I'm not as good as I want to be to solve it. I need you to help me. Can you do that in prayer? Just take a minute or two to do that now. Once we've got to the point of recognizing that we have a problem and we're admitting it, humbling ourselves before God, the next step becomes a bit tricky because it's really to identify the real issue. And in identifying the real issue, we have a situation where there can be a wrong diagnosis, a false diagnosis. The symptoms can actually hide the real issue. Someone comes along and says, oh, I've got this pain. And the doctor says, well, and tries to find it, because it could be an injury, but it could be a disease, or it could be referred pain from somewhere else. It could be arthritis, it could be a tumor. You know, these different things that happen in our lives can come from various different sources, and we want to be able to diagnose exactly what we're dealing with so that we deal with the real problem. I like the idea, when I come to help people, to identify the root cause or the initiating event of a problem in someone's life. Was there a trigger or a starting point? Or maybe it's a family issue, has come down through the generations, or is there a curse or a blight? I remember talking to someone in New Zealand when I was sharing about this years ago, and they made the observation that they had a desperate fear of being in elevators or closed rooms. They had a desperate fear, and I said, where did that come from? I said, I know exactly where it comes from, they said. Oh, how was that? Well, when I was a boy, all the cousins came over and were playing hide and seek, and I went under the house and there was a great big old fat old-fashioned refrigerator lying on its back. I thought, I'm going to hide in there, so I dived in and pulled the door closed over me. I hadn't realized there was no door handle on the inside. Hadn't thought about the fact that it was very well insulated and you couldn't hear a kid screaming from inside one of those things. And I was screaming and screaming and screaming, and nobody heard me and nobody found me. And it got to the point where they'd caught everybody and they couldn't find the last boy, and the parents began to get interested where he was, and they went around hunting, and one of the dads pulled the door open on this thing, and there was this kid that was just about hysterical, gasping for breath and terrified that he was going to die. And every time he walked into any kind of closed space, it just brought back all of those memories for him, okay? So where did that problem come from? It came from a particular time, on a particular day, in a particular place. We can anchor that right down there, right? But some people, you say, well, you've got this problem with anger. You want prayer for anger. Yes. Said, well, how long have you been angry? All my life. Really? At the age of 3, were you angry? I don't think so. At the age of 8, were you angry? No, I don't think so. At high school, were you angry? Oh, yeah, I was angry at high school. Yeah. Yes, in fact, in the first year at high school, I found it really intimidating because I was a bit of a hero in my primary school. When I got to high school, there was a bunch of other kids and they all wanted to be tough, and I found myself and the only response was to get angry, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay, we can track it down to maybe your first year at high school, and the influence of all the other kids has had something to do with you having an anger problem. We're now moving toward defining what it is. But someone might say, do you know, I've had an anger all my life, and my dad's angry, and my uncle's angry, and my brothers are angry, and granddad's angry. You think, well then that's just something that's transferring down through the family, and we'll deal with that a little bit differently. Okay, so we would like to find out what's really going on in someone's life. Someone might say to me, oh, my daughter used to be so sweet and so wonderful until she hit teenager years, and I guess it was probably just, become puberty or something that they think, well, let's just go back and explore that. Was that really the cause, or was there something else that happened? Because you can at least identify the season that it happened, right? And different people with different issues have spoken to me over the years, and I like to ask this question, where do you think it came from? And often we can trace it right back to a specific experience. Is there a curse or a blight? What is going on? What was the trigger? I like to do that because then you can attack the thing really specifically, right? If you knew that you had ants getting into your house, well, you could spray the entire house if you want to, but if you actually found the place where they're coming in, then you feel, yes, I'm going to get them right there. I've got the spot. And so spiritually, it's always good to try and find what you're dealing with. Imagine I'm a pastor, and on a Sunday morning, 3 women come to the church who were 30 years of age, who all came to church the previous week and all became Christians. Then they all came back together as friends, and they came up to me after the service, Pastor, we want prayer because we want to get set free from smoking. Okay, 3 girls, all been Christians for 1 week, and they've all got the same problem, which is smoking. I said, how long have you been smoking for? Oh, since we were 16. They had the same problem, started at the same time. They're all the same age. They've been Christians for 1 week. They've all got the same problem. I can pray a blanket prayer. Lord, set them free from smoking. But I don't. I say to the first girl, and this is only a made-up story, I say to her, why or when did you start smoking? Yes, you were 16. Why did you start smoking? Well, I started smoking because my parents have smoked all my life. And my mother probably smoked when I was in the womb. I think I've been addicted to nicotine since the day I was born. And I love the smell of cigarettes. I would stand behind my dad when he was watching television and breathe in the smoke that he was smoking. And my parents said if ever they caught a cigarette in my hand, they'd break my fingers until I was 16. On my 16th birthday at 1 minute past midnight, I took out the cigarette I'd been saving up and and did I feel good after waiting all those years, okay? So this girl's probably got a nicotine addiction problem, We've now got a chemical problem in her system, right? That's caused her to be a cigarette smoker. I say to the second girl, why did you start smoking cigarettes? Oh, well, when I was 16, my friend here started smoking and the others were smoking and they wanted me to smoke. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that because my parents didn't want me to. And I told my parents I would never, ever be a smoker. Mum, I'll never, ever smoke. But as we walked home from school, the boys would pull up in their car and say, hey, come, we'll give you a lift to the milk bar. Come on. And then they said, but you can't come in unless you take a puff off the cigarette. So my girlfriends jumped in and said, come on, come on, come on, just take a puff. It's all you got to do and you can come with us. Come on. And finally she took a puff and then she got into the car and they drove her down to the milk bar to buy their milkshakes. So in her case, she had made up her mind something she was definitely not going to do was to smoke, and yet she smoked to please her peer group. She sold out her will to the peer group. That's quite different to the first girl who had chemical addiction. So I say to the third girl, I said, when did you start smoking? Why are you smoking? She said, oh, well, when my friend turned up smoking, I thought, yes, that's wonderful. You see, I hate my dad's guts. And there's one thing he can't stand is cigarette smoke. So I borrowed a cigarette off my friend, went home that afternoon, made sure I sat next to Dad at dinner time, and halfway through the meal, I went out to the kitchen. I lit up, sucked in a lungful of smoke, sat down beside him and blew it in his face. And he went mad and raged, and I ran out of the house laughing, yes, I got my dad back. Does that sound like the same problem as the other two girls? That sounds like she's got deep issues with her and her dad that have got to get sorted out. There's a whole lot of garbage in there. So is one prayer going to suit all three? No, they've all got to be taken on an individual basis, based on where did this thing come from? Identify what you're really dealing with. What was the cause? Where did it come from? And so that's to kind of give you an idea. Even in your life, you want to be able to say, God, I know I've got this issue. Where did it come from? What am I really dealing with here? And what was it that caused you to begin, and why? What happened, and how did you respond? So I want you to think about that as part of the journey you have, even with the issue that you're talking about here today as part of our workshop. Try and identify what you're really dealing with. Some people come and tell me what their problems are, and I think straight away, pride, 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 pride. You've got issues with pride. But they won't accept that. Oh, no, they were wrong, they were wrong, they were wrong. And I'm a victim of each of these people. I think to myself, you are misdiagnosing. You're way off target here, right? You've got issues with pride. You will not admit that you're not as good as you think you are. Now, I can't always say that to people because I don't like being slapped in the face or attacked. But sometimes you just have to sit back and think, I don't think I can help this person. They are not prepared to be honest with themselves. They're not prepared to look at what they're really dealing with. So as we come to admitting our need, I want you to realize that circumstances are not the problem. It's actually your heart and your heart responses. That is really the problem. And we see that in Proverbs 4:23, where we're told, keep your heart with all diligence. Like, be really diligent and careful about keeping your heart, because out of your heart come what? The issues of your life. Oh, let me ask you a question. Have you got any issues in your life? Do you know where they came from? Oh yeah, my husband. Oh yeah, my parents. Oh yeah, my older brother. Really? They actually come from here. Out of here come all the issues of your life. Perfect example. You'll have people who grew up in a home where they lost everything, or the father was a drunkard, or some tragedy happened, and of the 3 kids, there'll be 3 entirely different responses. If it was the circumstances, they would have all responded the same. Right? One of them says, I hate my dad. If it wasn't for him, and they spend their whole life licking their wounds and blaming someone else and want to be helped out on welfare because they deserve better than they got. That's their choice of their heart. Someone else says, oh, well, life's full of challenges. Let's go out and meet the challenges. Entirely different response from their heart. So, keep your heart diligently, because out of your heart are the issues of your life. And so as we identify the real problem, as we go back to find out what you're really dealing with, identify the real issue, remember, your heart is a very big part of what's going on. Have a look at what Jesus said, Mark 7. From within the hearts of men come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, wickedness, deceit, debauchery, envy, slander, arrogance, and foolishness. All this evil comes from where? Within. And it defiles people. So Jesus is telling us that we've got to be attentive. We have that from Solomon. The issues are coming from your heart. And Jesus said, it's out of the heart that all this garbage is going to come. Now, I want you to know that the exact origin may be hidden. So while I talk about find the root cause or go back and find the initiating incident, that may not be possible. And so don't stress over it if you've tried and you can't come up with anything. Just be humble and ask God to reveal. Say, God, why am I like this? What happened? And see if God will reveal that to you. We can proceed through the steps without it, but I always like to go there if I can. Look at the prayer of David. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there is any wicked way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. So we can come to God and say, God, I really resent that person. Why? I'll give you an example. When I was father of 5 boys before I had my daughter and my next son. So for many years, it was Chris, Susan, and boys, because there were 5 boys. But I noticed when I only had 3 children that I was treating my oldest boy differently. My oldest son was Stephen. And if I came into the room and there was Stephen, Daniel, and Matthew, and there was a mess, I didn't pick on Matthew because he was the baby. He got off with a whole lot of things. Daniel, I would have maybe roused on, but Stephen was the oldest and the most responsible, and I chewed him out every time. And one day, something had happened, and I'd done one of my dad numbers where I'd chewed Stephen out and been much more lenient on the other 2. And as I walked out of the room, I thought, wow, why am I so hard on Stephen? Like I just suddenly realized I was really cruel to my oldest boy and completely lenient to the other 2. God just prompted me to realize that something was wrong. And I prayed and said, God, what's going on here? Why am I doing this to Stephen? And it was the next day that I dawned on me. I was married young, I had a beautiful wife, and we had our son born after we'd been married for 11 months, right? Less than a year, right? Susan got pregnant early, which we were excited about, but I had no idea that another baby coming into my world was going to steal my wife off me. Like, she had to spend all the time with the baby. Guess who I wanted to spend my time with? My wife. And guess what? She was tired. She was frustrated. She had issues with the baby. And the baby was taking more and more of all of her life. And I was on the sidelines. I hadn't even been married for a year. And I'd had my wife stolen off me. So without realizing it, I resented Stephen. I resented him invading my world and stealing my wife off me. And the only way I could discover it was to see that my reactions toward him were actually inappropriate. And I thought, why am I doing this? I was punishing him for having invaded my world. I had to pray, Lord, I forgive Stephen for coming into my life. He's a gift. He's a blessing. I bless him. I bless my marriage. I bless Susan as being a mother. And I forgive Stephen for coming into my world and stealing my wife off me, making her so preoccupied with being a mum that I always got the short straw. I was the last one to get her time and attention and energy, and I wanted all of it. And I couldn't get it, right? And that was just a humbling experience. And but there I was. So here's this issue of saying, God, search me. Search me. Show me what's in my heart that I'm not even noticing. There are things in my heart. And by that, I was a good Christian boy. Like it wasn't like sin and evil. It was just that I had responded wrongly in my heart toward my son. So we have to do it now. I want you to think about, we're doing a workshop here, think about the issue that you've chosen to look at, and I want you to ask God to reveal what is the real issue. It may not be what you think, so be open to God to show you. Be humble, accept what God shows you, and let God search your heart and reveal things that He wants to lovingly free you from. That's what you're going to do now over the next minute. So just quietly, prayerfully before God, say to Him, God, what's really going on? Is this issue exactly the way I understand it, or is there something completely different that I haven't even observed? Is there something I need to take notice of right now? Let's do that.